Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV, back with another Market Watch episode. So obviously we are all still waiting for the ban list, which I thought for sure would be out by now, but that's okay. In the meantime, we're going to take a look at a few cards that are trending on the market right now, but not currently because of the ban list. Rather, they are cards that are maybe pieces of rogue strategies or fan favorite decks, or in some cases, just cards that people think will be good cards to own just in case something happens. Now, regardless, you'll definitely want to keep your eye out for these, just in case you happen to have some extra copies sitting around, waiting to be unloaded, or you have the opportunity to pick some up for cheap so that you can flip them. Let's get started. Alright, now kicking things off, we have marincis coral anemone. This is a Link 2 monster that you can make with 2 water monsters. It has an effect that allows you to special summon a water monster from your graveyard with 1500 or less attack points to a zone that this card points to, but then locks you into water monsters for the rest of the turn. It does have another effect, but that is specifically for the marincis deck, not too relevant. I don't think too many people are looking at marincis right now. Rather, the first effect is important because it means that this card is a great extender in water-based strategies, most notably the ice barriers and maybe even the Arctic depending on how they shape up. It doesn't negate the effect of the monster that it summons, right? So you can bring back something like a swap frog and still get to dump a card, but it allows you to extend into links, synchros, or ixies as long as it's water monsters that you're going into, so it can be a very flexible card. Obviously, I don't think that ice barriers are going to be meta anytime soon, even with the new support, but they are a cool deck that a lot of casual players will turn to because it's so easy to build with just 3 structure decks. Now, because of that, the original secret rare copies of this card are up at $12 each, but even the reprint ultra rares, which were only $1 or $2 when the megatins first came out, are now up at $4 each. Definitely a card that you'll want to pick up soon if you're looking to pick up and play ice barriers, just because I believe that this is actually something that ice barriers play multiple of, and I wouldn't be surprised if this card didn't see another reprint for quite some time. It's still at a low enough price point that if you need it to finish off your deck, you may as well go ahead and grab it now. Next up is kind of a funny one. We have Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss. So this card is a level 9 synchro monster that requires a dark dragon type synchro non-tuner monster to make, which is a really specific requirement. The last time that we saw this card see play, it was only being summoned out of the extra deck directly by using the effect of Guard Dragon Agarpain. Now, however, we are actually starting to see this card pop up in Dragon Link once again. You can make this card by using Chaos Ruler, the level 8 synchro out of Rise of the Duelist, along with a copy of Rocket Synchron if you are playing Dragon Link. It's another negate that you can get onto the board, and the addition of Chaos Ruler is actually a really cool extender that helps Dragon Link to fetch a card and potentially load up the graveyard as well. Now, interestingly enough, this card has 2 ultra rare printings available, and in my opinion, the 2 are basically identical. If I had 2 of them right next to each other, I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference unless I was looking specifically at the code. However, we are seeing a big price difference between the 2 versions, with the original High Speed Riders Ultras at $11 each, while the Dual Power Ultra Rare reprints are still under $1. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I personally would just go ahead and grab the reprints and offload the original Ultras if you're able to find someone who cares enough about the difference to be willing to pay more for it. Also, do remember that this card is really only being used in Dragon Link at the moment, and I would say that there's a 50% chance that we see Guard Dragon LP hit on the next ban list. If LP is hit and Dragon Link suffers as a result, then this card probably won't be seeing any more play in the meta. Even the originals should fall in price then. Overall, I would say that this is definitely a card that you should be offloading if you still own those original copies, and I personally would be perfectly fine with owning and playing with identical looking reprinted ultra rares. So the next card I want to talk about here is Harpies Feather Duster, specifically the gold rare version from Out of Maximum Gold. So I believe that when this reprint did first come out, it was only around $4 to $5 a piece. Everyone was tearing open Maximum Gold and there was a ton of quantities available on the market. And for some reason, I remember a lot of people expecting it to be reprinted in maybe the Ice Barrier structure deck as well. However, as I was just discussing with one of my friends over the weekend, gold rare feather dusters are actually up at $9 to $10 a piece, despite the gold rare being one of the lower rarities of the card, and despite it still being limited to 1. Obviously, Feather Duster can be a big blowout card, especially in a format like we have today, where multiple control decks are viable, especially if they don't have access to something like Solemn Judgment in order to protect themselves. It's interesting to note that despite how much people did tear into Maximum Gold and open it, the card is still somewhat expensive, though it is on par with the rare and Starfoil versions of Feather Duster from Battle Pack 1. Obviously, I don't know when we should be expecting another reprint of Harpies Feather Duster. It could be a lower rarity, easily accessible version in something like Ghost from the Past, or it could be a high rarity version like an OTS Tournament Pack Ultimate Rare. I don't think that Harpies Feather Duster is a bad card to own. In fact, if you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh at all, I would definitely recommend having at least one copy for yourself to play in your own deck. However, if you do have extra gold rare or rare copies that you're not using, I would definitely consider offloading them while they are still at $10 a piece before they get a more easily accessible reprint that would consequently bring down all of their values. Up next, we have a card that I feel like has flown under the radar for quite some time. We have Minerva the Exalted Lightsworn. So obviously the prize card versions of this card still exist, and they are very expensive, but aside from that, there is only one version of the card that exists here in the TCG, and that is the short printed secret rare version from the original Battles of Legends set, Light's Revenge. Now admittedly, Lightsworns aren't doing anything too crazy right now, however they did get a couple of really cool boosts with cards like Chaos Ruler and Chaos Space. They play like a lot of combo decks nowadays and can really pop off if they happen to mill well. Minerva is of course a key card in the deck because it allows you to mill cards and then potentially draw things as well, and it's a generic rank 4 that you can basically go into at any time. So yeah, they may not be meta relevant, especially because with the way that the deck works, you kind of have to get a bit lucky with your mills, but they are a pretty popular deck with a lot of the player base because they can be so much fun. Anyways, secret rare Minervas were only around $8 to $10 for quite some time, which has always kind of felt undervalued, especially for a card that only has one printing available. Now currently, the card is sitting up at $15 a piece, I think with a lot of potential to continue to trend upwards in price. Obviously, this does depend on if we see another reprint of Minerva coming anytime soon, but at the moment, I don't think that there's any Lightsworn support on the horizon coming from Konami, and I doubt that they would reprint the card for no reason out of nowhere. If you do happen to own this card, I would say that this is a hold. I definitely wouldn't be selling it quite yet because I think it does have the potential to hit $30 or so as an older card with only one version available, and that one version being a short printed secret rare from a side set. However, of course, don't chase the card if you're going to try to pick some up. I think that if you can pick it up for anywhere from $10 to $12, maybe $13 somewhere at your locals, that would be more than reasonable. One card that I want to touch on really briefly here is actually Gran Maju de Aiza. So I still remember when Gran Maju topped out of nowhere. It was pretty unexpected, and I don't think anyone had the deck on their radar before that, but I mean the deck did have access to a ton of pretty interesting danger cards, and it was able to one-shot players out of nowhere, and that's a lot easier to do when no one's expecting it and trying to play around it. Recently, however, the card hasn't seen too much play. I think that with more control decks this format, it can be a bit harder to hit things and deal enough damage to win the game, and then it could be very easy for your opponent to outgrind you and then come back after. Anyways, I guess maybe people are looking at Gran Maju as potentially being a viable rogue deck once again in the future, maybe after the next ban list, as we did see a small bump up in the price of the super rare copies of Gran Maju, which are currently sitting at $7 each. Of course, the commons are still only $1 or $2, so still very affordable, but these supers are the only holo version of the card that are currently available. It's worth noting that the deck did potentially get something of a boost with the release of Pot of Prosperity, which could help you to pull a Gran Maju out of your deck while also helping to get additional cards into the banish zone, though of course it does make it harder for you to deal enough damage to your opponent in order to win the game that turn. I do think that this would be a good card to keep an eye on moving forward because it will always have that sort of rogue potential. People will be hyped up for that deck at different points. I would wait for the price of this card to cool back down to maybe $4 to $5 or so. Then if you can pick up someone's extra copies at around the $2 to $3 mark, I think that's a reasonable price to pay to buy in and grab your copies to hold on to. Otherwise, I would be looking to move these if you are able to get their full market value for them before they dip back down in price. Next up, we have Gatling Dragon. So for those of you guys who play GOAT format, you'll probably know what this card is, even though it's not really the type of card that you're going to be going into all that often. This is one of the few level 8 fusion monsters that's actually viable in the format, so it's what you would make by using Metamorphosis on Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the beginning. Now, GOAT format has actually been incredibly popular recently, with a lot of people starting to look at building it and playing it in online tournaments. I personally am really fond of GOAT format. My friends and I each have several decks made, and we're starting to see a lot of people in our area wanting to build the decks as well. Anyways, because you can play as big of an extra deck as you want in GOAT format, technically this is a card that you could use 3 copies of, because why not? However, it turns out that Gatling Dragon is one of those cards that, despite having multiple reprints, is actually really hard to find. Obviously, it has its original ultra rare and ultimate rare printings from Flaming Eternity, and then an ultra rare printing from Dark Revelation 3. All of those are quite expensive. I think that the ultimate rares are like $50 for Unlim, and then $100 to $120 for ultimate rare first editions. Aside from that though, the card only has 2 common printings, one from Legendary Collection Yugi's World and another from OTS Tournament Pack 7, both of which are actually quite difficult to find. Now, as a result, these low rarity versions are actually all the way up at $15 each. Of course, that's a fair bit to be paying for a card that you're just using sometimes in a fun casual format. So if you really need it, it's probably easier to just go ahead and proxy it or share a copy with your opponent, as long as you're playing like with your friends or something like that. In terms of when this card could be reprinted, I kind of think it could see a reprint similar to the Last Warrior from Another Planet or King Dragoon, just randomly inserted into some sort of set, and that will eventually bring the card's price down, especially because technically this card is part of the whole Barrel Dragon theme, and there will probably be some sort of retrain of Barrel Dragon coming up sometime in the future. If you happen to know that you have this card sitting around in your bulk, now is a great time to dig them out before they happen to get some sort of reprint, so that you can offload them now at their higher price. Another interesting one here, apparently ultra rare Skull Servants from Legendary Collection Yugi's World actually got bought out and are now sitting at basically $50 to $70 a piece on TCG Player. So recently, I guess someone decided to buy out this card, even though the deck hasn't really seen any sort of competitive success or tournament use at all. In Blazing Vortex, we did get White Baking, a Skull Servant card that is actually really cool, because when it is sent to the graveyard, it allows you to search for 2 Skull Servant cards and add them to your hand, and then discard a card, which is a pretty big consistency boost for a deck like this. Obviously, I don't think that this is enough to make them viable or meta relevant or anything like that, but apparently it is enough for people to jump in and want to bling out this deck. But yeah, the ultra rare copies of this vanilla monster are actually up at $50 a piece lowest right now, which is a trend that we are starting to see happen with a lot of cards from Legendary Collection Yugi's World. It's a set that there wasn't very much circulation of, but it's also the only place to get some pretty unique rarities of popular cards. So if there's any sort of demand for the cards from this set, they generally spike up in price pretty quickly. Of course, guys, I cannot in good conscience tell you to hold on to this card, and I would definitely recommend that you sell it. Mind you, I also offloaded my copies at $15 each, thinking that this was already way more value than I should be getting for a card like this. So if you guys really believe in Skull Servants, or believe that this card can continue to go up from here, I guess you can go ahead and hold on to it and hope. But for me, this is way too much value for me to be passing up on, and I would be looking to offload it as soon as possible. The final card we're going to take a look at here is Necro Valley, specifically the ultimate rare version from Astral Pack 4. So a few weeks ago we looked at Gravekeeper's Commandant and Royal Tribute as key pieces of that Necro Valley Dragoon Turbo deck, where you use Necro Valley and Royal Tribute to lock down a pretty significant amount of your opponent's cards. Now, I guess pretty naturally, people looked at Ultimate Rare Necro Valleys as being the highest rarity version of the card, and we saw it basically completely bought out, with the cheapest copies on TCG Player now being about $150 a piece. Obviously, this is pretty ridiculous, but as an ultimate rare from a fairly old Astral Pack, it's going to be pretty slow to list back onto the market. This is actually a pretty interesting card that does have a lot of potential to be used as a side deck option, even if you're not playing the whole Royal Tribute engine, as it can really effectively lock down decks like Eldritch and Virtual World by preventing them from banishing cards from their graveyard. Now, of course, this card does have a ton of different printings with a lot of common prints, a rare, a couple supers, and a couple of ultras as well. So if you're just looking for any copy of this card to use and have access to, even if you need that copy to be holo, that should be pretty easy to do. It's just that if you're looking for the max rarity version of this card, then you're going to struggle a little bit. I definitely don't think it's worth paying this amount for Alti Necro Valleys, even if you're some sort of like really hardcore Gravekeeper fan. I don't think that this card is realistically going to be moving for anywhere close to this price. So if you happen to still have some, maybe feel around, see what someone is actually willing to pay for them. I guarantee it's not going to be quite this high, and just try to get as much value for them as you can while the prices seem inflated. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. I know I also can't believe that we still don't have a ban list yet. I really thought that we were going to get it last week. Hopefully it will be coming out this week. It is still interesting to see how the casual market and past formats can influence different card prices, but of course looking at the meta and those trends is going to be what interests and influences most people. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's market watch, please make sure that you hit that thumbs up button to let me know. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards that we talked about today, and also let me know what else is trending on the market so that I can potentially cover it in a future episode as well. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button for all of the latest content from both Tombox and myself here. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.